I'm Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic, and welcome to the Great Rally Book Study. So, just a quick look back at last week. We looked at the first 40 members of Alcoholics Anonymous and by name as accurate as we could, and we noticed that there was some interesting amount of how many they had in a row versus how many. Like at one point they had 14 failures in a row within the first couple of years, and all of a sudden they had like 11 in a row that were positive, and it just kept going and going and going. And then we also looked at the recovery rates over the years. And it's kind of an elephant in the room of AA. It's like people either point it out or they want to act like it doesn't exist. And we talked about Silkworth's recovery rates, and we'll talk more about that tonight. But Dr. Silkworth, his recovery rates were 2% and a 90% failure rate. And he says the 2% were probably weren't even alcoholics. That's prior to AA. AA comes around and the recovery rates go up to 75% success rate, 90% in some claims or more. And how the record, we talk about how the record has dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped to where it's, with two census reports done in the 90s, 2% and stuff like that, crazy. But we talked about we closed out last week with a very, I'd like to say it was emotional talk, and it was about what was going on in the world in 40-ish, and or actually 55, because we were at the end of the second edition, and there was segregation was going on, horrible. Women's liberation hadn't happened yet. You had two wars, with Korea and World War II, and the people that would live in the United States from those countries were ridiculed against, and they couldn't go anywhere together or look at anyone, and they didn't have equal rights. But in AA, they all did. So AA was a groundbreaker in that way. Huge. Yeah, just amazing. So tonight we begin our journey into the world of recovery, and that's Docker's opinion. I want to begin by talking about the writer of Docker's opinion. That's William Duncan Silkworth, and they call it the little man who lived drunks, and the man whose theory, because it is a theory about a physical reaction to alcohol, changed the world forever. It's a theory because anything in life from experience is from experience. Anything else is a theory. But how could a guy take a theory that works? Because you're going to see in a minute, he worked with over 40,000 alcoholics before AA. So Silkworth, let me put up a picture of him real quick. I love some of these pictures. Oh, let me do it right. Hold on. Uh-oh. I better talk to my phone. Sorry about that. Someone called me. Sponsee. Have to call him back. So let me screen share here. All right. Hold on one second. So this is Dr. Silkworth, and Silkworth, he was a specialist in neurology. He also crossed into psychiatry as well, but he got his feet wet in the psychiatric wing, we'll call it, at Bellevue Hospital in New York City. And Bellevue, I think you guys got a good look at him there. I'm going to close that down. Bellevue was a hospital that was a regular hospital. Off to the side, off underneath, towards the bottom of the hospital in those days, they had the psychiatric ward. And those people in those wards, a lot of them were alcoholics. And it was during his time there, he got a passion for helping alcoholics. And he discovered it as an illness. The alcoholism is an illness, and that alcoholics had an insufficient quality of enzymes produced by the liver and the pancreas, which resulting in the body not being able to break down alcohol correctly. So picture your liver and slowly breaking down alcohol. Now, I have a stomach issue, right? And I don't break down food very well. So I do it better now, but I used to take food enzymes to help me has sufficient insights. It's the same idea, but a little more crazier. Um, but that caught that lack of, that breaking down alcohol incorrectly, that creates a physical reaction. And he called that physical reaction, the phenomenon of craving, an unexplainable craving. He also talks about it being a physical allergy. We'll get more into that later, but that's all the body's abnormal reaction after taking the first drink, leading the craving, leaving the person craving for more. This physical reaction is coupled with a mental part. Some people call it an obsession. And it's just a reoccurring, persistent idea of drinking that doesn't spawn a reason and completely lacks choice. There's no choice involved. It keeps, bringing you back to it over and over again, despite evidence to the contrary, despite evidence that you might lose your kid. It's killing you. They say because of that obsession, it all fits into a pipe. It all fits into your house fits into a bottle, your kids fit into a bottle, your money fits in a bottle, your job fits into it all fits into a bottle or a pipe, whatever you want to call it. And so basically, we have no defense against the first drink because of the mental aspect. And we have no defense against the second drink and the third drink and the fourth drink or the sixth drink or the 10th drink because of the bodily different part. Basically, I have a mind that condemns me to drink against my will, and I have a body that condemns me to death. A mind that condemns me to drink against my will, and a body that condemns me to death. Silkworth, though, this idea that this is the illness or disease, I call it illness, it wasn't the first person that did it. We mentioned this when we covered the history at the beginning of this book study. Talk about Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was a pioneer in mental health. He was he was George Washington's doctor during the Revolutionary War. He was assigned the Declaration of Independence. He's the first Surgeon General. He declared alcoholism in 1884, sorry, a disease. And he says it wasn't a condition of weak-willed and sinful people like everyone said and the press pushed, and that was a physical dependence that led to an uncontrollable desire to consume alcohol. And this disease should be treated like one. And he's mentioned, if Rush mentioned, rather than punishing the alcoholic with imprisonment or worse, that the answer lied in some type of moral treatment, even though he could never figure out what that was. And all the press, all the politicians, all the churchgoers, they thought he was nuts. They were afraid. And one problem with Rush was he said alcoholism was a disease. That's how far as he went. He couldn't explain why. Silkworth explained why. And that's the allergy obsession. He explained exactly why. But Rush knew something was going on. He just couldn't figure it out. And Rush had his solution was abstinence. He didn't have a recovery plan. Neither did Silkworth. Silkworth was the exact same. Solution was abstinence, good luck, and no recovery plan. They didn't even know the word recovery, which explains his 2% recovery rate. And like I said, he said this 2% weren't even alcoholics. Now, other stuff I mentioned in covering history, we're going to look at too, because it ties into Silkworth so well. We talked about, we in the book, we hear the word asylums mentioned quite a bit. Came back to the asylum or went to the asylum to get the person out, whatever we did. Some of us, had been there, but I've been on the Frankenstein chair strapped down tight before back in the day. Rubber room, whatever. But I mentioned alcoholics would wind up in these places and a lot more than today. I mean, today we got treatment centers and they try our best to, not keep them there too long anymore. But since alcoholism was viewed as, as a problem of the mind, the belief was let's detain the alcoholic or addict, and so the press would deem alcoholic and addicts as thieves and rapists and gamblers and prostitutes and murderers and dangerous predators. And so there was so many people falsely accused before the police even had the stuff in newspapers that we believe the guy was under the influence or something like that, right? And rather than let these predators, be on roam the streets, let's lock them up. And so they put them in mental institutions, and there was rules in mental institutions. We'll get that in a minute, but it was in 1864 that Dr. Samuel Woodward of New York, because of his concern over the effects of alcohol on society, of course. Remember, 250,000 soldiers left Civil War addicted to morphine. And there was a little bit more than that addicted to alcohol already, and who knows how many more, probably close to 600,000 addicts, alcoholics in the United States. So he's going to make some bucks. So he created the inebriate asylum just for alcoholics and drug addicts. Look it up. You can read a lot more about it. But inebriate asylums and insane asylums were different. And insane asylums, like I said, had rules for addicts and alcoholics. They weren't sitting there going like this and totally crazy, right? So they weren't allowed to do shock therapy on alcoholics, or or dope them up and with tranquilizers and stuff. But when they created inebriate asylums, of course, they didn't put those rules in. None of those rules took place. So patients were doped up on tranquilizers, sedatives, and other drugs, right? And they're even given, the electroshock therapy. And some, they would lobotomize alcoholics. It was known. And some of these guys' brains would get so scrambled, they'd be, oh, we made a mistake. Let's just, change his name, and he would stay in there. And the treatment in inebriate asylums involved yelling, physical abuse, scare them straight. But in 1922, inebriate asylums were declared inhumane and closed, and they were converted to insane asylums, meaning now alcoholics and addicts were in full-blown mental institutions. And since the inebriate asylums all wrote them down as mentally ill, which they didn't do in the original insane asylums, now they're in the mental institutions listed as mentally ill. So they're diagnosed as mentally sick, meaning these alcoholics and addicts were classified that, and they would rarely give the opportunity to leave. And these patients just seem to disappear, like I said, in the system. Silkworth says 1920s. You got to remember, this is Silkworth had been 38 years already in when the big book was written. So he was in the heart of all that stuff. He was in some of those places, and he left Bellevue and opened a private practice in the 20s, mid-20s. And so he could properly diagnose alcoholics and give them fair treatment. Take the problem head on, right? He had a vision, and he invested all his savings in stock. But guess what? The stock market crashed. So now he didn't have any money in there at all. So in 1930, desperate and broke, he goes and sees this guy that he knows named Charles B. Towns. And Towns offered him to be medical director of Towns Hospital in New York City, which specialized in treatment for alcoholics and drug addicts. And he accepted the position for $40 a week plus room and board. And Silkworth's plan was, I'll work there a while, then I'll reenter myself back into society, and into another place, a normal place, whatever, something, his own practice. Never happened. Never happened. Towns Hospital, I'll put up a slide of that really quick. Let me throw that up really quick. This is what it looks like. You can find, I think the building is still there in New York, from what I understand. But that's what it looked like, Towns Hospital. And that's I believe it was founded in 1901 by Charles Towns. But his mission was to make money, of course, to solely treat alcoholics and addicts. And so he did this thing called belladonna treatment. And it's a mixture of henbane, which is a drug, dried berries and other plants, basically to clean you out, give you, sit on the golden throne for a while, and get rid of intestinal cramps and all that, detox you. And get this, I said it was used to clean you out, so you could do detox. They gave that to them every hour on the hour for 50 hours. Until the patient's face became clear. Eyes were dilated, throat was dry. On top of that, they made him do physical exercise during that. So, like I said, Towns was in this for the money, and it was a place for the wealthy. that even though Bill Wilson made it in there, it was his brother-in-law, Leonard Strong, that got him in there, in Towns. Otherwise, Bill would never even made it in there because it was for the wealthy. American millionaires, European royalty, oil sheiks, detox there. The rooms look like these fancy suites with personal bathrooms and telephones and bathrobes and slippers and, you know, the kind of like the promises rehabs we see nowadays with all these fancy stuff they give you there. But the cost of admission was about $350 for a 4 to 6 day stay. I don't have the mathematician mind to figure out how much it is today, but you could probably, Rob might be able to figure it out. I don't know, maybe 40, 50 grand. But Towns' advertising pitch was he claimed to have the cure. Remember that commercial used to come on in the middle of the night, like midnight, about 10 years ago, and the guy said, "I got the cure for alcoholism." That's what Towns was doing, right? But it wasn't a pill. But he claimed a 90% recovery rate. And so this is what his ad looked like. His ad looked like that, Charles B. Towns, and it's got a little thing on there. This ad went up in the newspaper all the time for alcohol and drug addiction for over 30 years, blah, blah, blah. So it's pretty interesting. The thing about it was 90% recovery rate. We know that was bullshit because he hired Silkworth. Silkworth debunks that. He's like, "You're a fool." But Silkworth could explain it to him. And by the time Silkworth, by that time Silkworth worked with over 40,000 alcoholics. He worked with about 55,000 all in all. So 15,000 after A, 40,000 before A, the 2% recovery rate, right? He had. And this Towns is claiming a 90% recovery rate, which Silkworth laughed it off, and because he knew a 98% failure rate. He knew a lot more than Towns did. And Towns is kind of leaning on, oh, maybe he's right. But problem with Towns was he believed it was a psychological and medical model program, which is fine, but did not believe alcohol was an illness. Remember when we did the history, all the groups that didn't believe it as an illness or couldn't agree, right? And Silkworth, he debunked that, explained that certain individuals who drank had that, like I mentioned, the physical reaction to alcohol, make it impossible for an alcoholic, to tolerate alcohol correctly. We'll just say it like that. But Towns accepted this fact and handed the keys. He gave the keys to him to the hospital. You run this place. Originally he was hired not as a medical director, just a doctor, but he said, "You run it." And also Silkworth's allergy exception concept changed. We need to change alcohol forever, and Towns used that as advertising pitch, explaining it to people. This guy, you gotta see this guy, and his backers and stuff and everything. But imagine your Silkworth though. 2% recovery rate is all he's ever known with 40,000 alcoholics. Wilson shows up, and over time, 75% recovery rate, all that. Imagine if you have the passion that Silkworth had for drunks and you got to witness that. It's amazing. You can find them on silkworth.net. He wrote some medical journals for alcoholism, manifestation of an allergy in 1937. 1937 was written, which spearheaded doctors' opinion. That's why they brought him in, because he wrote that. And it was good. Also, of course, Bill knew who he was, and he helped Bill along the way. But his radical concept that the body was sick and, not just the mind, helped alcohol, it changed everything. It got Alcoholics Anonymous out of mental hospitals. See what I'm saying is, remember, they're in mental hospitals just because they're just easily diagnosed as mentally ill. And this guy's saying, wait a minute, I worked this place for, 38 years at the time. And I worked with 40,000 alcoholics. They're not just a mental problem, it's a physical problem. And they're like, physical problem? But, interesting about Silkworth in 1945, he convinced him, he went to work for Knickerbocker in New York. And what he did there, he convinced him to set up a small, it was actually a good sized ward for the treatment of alcoholism. And this was the first general hospital in the US, anywhere in the world, to do so. And hospital at that time, you had to admit people under falsified illnesses like Dr. Bob did at his hospital. Like say alcoholics, this guy's got acute gastritis, or this guy's got, had a some type of headache or something, chicken pox or something. But he served 6 years at Knickerbocker Hospital as director, and attending an estimated, I think it was close to 15,000 in those last few years, but the a lot of people, a lot of people. And there was he had a nurse there named Teddy R, and A members, they helped him run that ward, and they just were knocking people out as far as bringing them to A and helping them. Um, the one thing that Silkworth brought to Knickerbocker, though, was he made it cost effective for people, way cheaper, and that anyone off the streets, no matter if they're homeless or whatever, were able to come there. He didn't care. His motto was, if we don't want this, we'll never say no to you because about money. Never would do it. But so, he worked at Knickerbocker till his death in 1951, and Bill Wilson said, thank heaven we started before Silkworth went, so he could witness it. I'm going to read a little about what Bill Wilson wrote about Silkworth. He was utterly and completely indigenous to money, position, personal gain, prestige of any kind. He never sought this distinction. His work was his reward. His faith was his firmer than our faith in ourself. Without his help, we would never have gotten started or kept going. His contribution was indispensable. He showed us doctoring was mainly a spiritual vocation, and that the vast majority of physicians really joined the profession to serve their fellow man. The man I'm speaking of is our first friend, the little doctor who loved drunks, William Douglas. You see Bill Wilson's love for this guy, a man who is very much a founder as I am. From him, we learned the nature of our illness. He supplied us with the tools which puncture the toughest alcoholic ego, those shattering phrases that describe the illness, the obsession of the mind that compels a person to drink to drink, and the allergy of the body that condemns us to go mad or die. Wow. Without him, bringing these indispensable words, AA would never worked. Why he loved drunk was a secret only to God and the doctor. He brought you somehow to make your own judgments for yourself, and the only kind of judgments that count with an alcoholic. How he did it, he just smiled and would say, it's a gift. He learned very early the unexpected was to be expected with alcoholics. And for a man who knew as many of the answers as he did, he came to each new case with a wonderful open mind. When no one could calm a disturbed drunk, Silkworth could. He found, rather in his amazement, that even the toughest and most case-hardened drunks would talk to him freely, and that many of them, even more amazingly, wept. Just coming into his presence was like walking into a light. He not only had a vision, he gave vision. Perhaps no physician will ever give so much devoted attention to alcoholics as he did. He never got tired of drunks and their problems. It is estimated that in his lifetime, he saw an amazing 50,000 alcoholics, more like 55,000, but he treated 40,000 long before he existed. But he always had faith one day an answer will be found. In 15 years of his life, in his cooperation with AA, he ministered to 10,000 more drunks. None of those he treated ever forgot the experience, and none of those 10,000, many of those 10,000 are sober today. A frail man, he never complained of fatigue. In his last years, he ignored a heart condition and died right there on the job with his boots on. And Bill says, I believe A was his reward. All those years of prodding along, treating drunks, loving them, and giving them anything much as he could give. And then God said, all right, little man, I'm going to give you your drunks a lift. And when the lightning struck, there he was, right where he belonged in the midst of it all. One last thing Bill Wilson said, it was at the end of that, he says, it was 23 years after Silkworth had treated me for the last time. I thank God for doctors. And he just goes on, it's a little bit longer, but you see Bill's love for the guy in there. Because without Silkworth, A may have never existed, and his contributions to us were huge. Think about any doctor gets scared today to tell you anything radical, even if you go to the doctor and say, well, hey, I took this, this herbal medication and it helped me a lot. They're like, well, like I went to the doctor recently for an issue, and I told him I cured it with the holistic stuff, and he's just like, well, I'm glad it worked for you. Like he don't want to admit to it, but Silver puts medical reputation on the line. And one of his biggest contributions, of course, is the allergy obsession concept. And drinking was accepted, drunkards weren't, and alcoholism was considered this moral weakness, in sin. He changed that. And then his other contribution he did was, doctor's opinion, and Bill's a salesman, and Hank Parker taught Bill because, with the salesman part, and they knew they needed third-party testimonials. He knew that a group of drunks publishing a book was laughable. Again, risking his medical reputation, he wrote doctor's opinion, and that's giving A his endorsement and approval at a time where there was only 100 drunks dried up. You think about that. I mean, there's a book coming out for drunks written by drunks, with all the stigma and false, stuff they created over drunks. The third contribution was letting Bill sponsor at towns. Again, risking his medical reputation, he permitted Bill, to work with alcoholics at towns, even though there was no history of success of their program. And other drunks would have turned, other doctors, would have turned Bill down in a second. Without Silkworth, A may have never existed. Another contribution, he told Bill, you're not insane. When Bill has spiritual experience in the hospital, and he's sitting there and he's all, doc, am I insane? He says, anything's better than what you were. You better hold on to it. Doctor nowadays would have given him a pill. Say, you hallucinate, here's a pill. Go to sleep. If that would have destroyed all hope and faith right there. Without those words, you're not insane. We may never existed. And another contribution, after 6 months of failing with alcoholics, Bill didn't know what to do. And he went back to talk to Silkworth and asked Bill, what are you talking to them about? And he says, I'm giving them God. I'm offering them God. And he goes, no, give them the hardcore medical facts first. The allergy and obsession. The next person he talked to was Bob. And rest is history. And the last contribution is, when we needed money, he raised over $4,000 from us. So he gathered it from other doctors. Again, risking his medical reputation. Imagine their doctor saying, who's writing this book? Without our book, it may have never existed. But since doctor's opinion is the meat, it's the meat and potatoes, because it's part of step. It's where we're introducing a step one. So let's look at that. Let's break it down really quick. I'm going to put up step one up here. Even though most of us know it, but someone may not. You never know. So there's an old saying: a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one single step. It all begins with step one. And we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Dash, their lives are unmanageable. So admit means to declare something as true, right? It also means to let in. I'm allowing you to enter, grant entry, right? Like a theater ticket says, admit one, right? Admit one. In essence, admitting you are powerless is your ticket into a new way of life. There's another saying, is the end justifies the means. That means dark life is necessary to achieve a new life. What gets you on the road to freedom isn't pretty. What does powerless mean? It's because there's all sorts of answers people give you in AA. To have a little less power. I heard a guy say that recently in a group. I was like, it means if my power goes off, I'm powerless. Lights are off. There's zero power. But we talk now, if it's a human zero power, it means no human power. We have no ability to solve our human problem using human resources. Why? Because the hopeless condition of mind and body that is impossible to solve on our own power. Step one does not require us to admit we're alcoholic. Like he'll say that. Step one's about admitting you're alcoholic. But rather that we're powerless over alcohol. Being powerless over alcohol means we have lost the freedom of choice when drinking over alcohol. Before you drink and after you drink. And so many in recovery do not know why we're powerless. And people want to say, "Oh, powerless places and things, and powerless because you're to your mother-in-law and all this stuff." It's because of an allergy obsession. We don't want to pee in the soup anymore that's already been pissed into. You know, we're talking about hardcore medical facts here that kill people. And someone's going to say, "I'm powerless." What am I going to say? I'm powerless to my neighbor across the street for pooping on my lawn, and I let him do it. And the next thing you know, my whole lawn's filled with, that's how silly it sounds. I can go tell him to stop. I can go get a divorce if I have to. I'm not powerless at people, places, and things. They say, we're not, no one of this book says we're powerless over anything else, right? We don't want to dilute this step. It's always up to us as recovered alcoholics to be at meetings to say that. It's the most important step, because if we are not ready to admit we're powerless, what else can happen? What else can happen? That's why he has the ABCs. That's why at the beginning of We Agnostics, he asks us the question, if you can't quit entirely, or if you have low control, he's asking us those questions again. Even back to 6 and 7 with the stones properly in place, he's asking us again. Step one is the only step we must do 100%. When people in the fellowships say that, it's completely twisted. When people say, "Oh, so you got to do step 100%," they're meaning abstinence. That's not what they're talking about here. The big book devotes 35 pages to step one, more than any other step, because Bill wants to be 100% convinced that we're powerless. 100%. 100%. The rest of the steps do not, you don't have to fully understand them to do them. You have a guide. Here's the truth. While we have taken step one, we all have taken step one. The truth is, step one took you first. Step one takes you. Knowing knowing you need power begins that aspect of powerless. You needed power. Again, that's when the end justifies the means. You notice that there's a dash. Now, it was Bill's secretary, Ruth, that Ruth mentioned, suggested the M dash. So it's not a hyphen, it's an M dash. It's an old school one, EM dash. It's a punctuation mark that is used instead of a comma. It's kind of like an exclamation point. It's to indicate a change in thought, yet keep the same idea, using it with a strong sentence to emphasize it, to make it stronger. It's kind of like a exclamation point at the end. But the word unmanageable is often misunderstood. It's the inability to manage and control your life and accomplish things without great difficulty. So manageable would be the ability to manage, control, and accomplish things without difficulty. Many think unmanageability in step one is referring to being loaded. Who is not unmanageable when they're loaded? I mean, Mother Teresa, my friend Derek used to say, "Give Mother Teresa an 8-ball, she'll be unmanageable." But it's true though. But unmanageability comes from many different directions. There's the obvious ones, consequences: jail, DUI, losing friends, family breakups, failed relationships, car accidents, rehabs, whatever it is, losing your job. But then there's an insanity that we can't stop drinking. The insanity of the first drink, where you don't even know you picked up. And Bill had mentioned in an interview, there's the unmanageability you experience when you're bone dry. And that's being restless, irritable, and discontent, which is a complete mindset of high anxiety, being easily pissed off, and never being satisfied at all crammed together. that's in between runs, that's being dry in recovery with no steps. We've all been there someplace in time. It's the way we think, act, and behave and deal with life, period. The big book calls this unmanageability main thing, the spiritual malady, spiritual sickness, and insanity. I like to call it untreated alcoholism, period. Gets to the point. If I continue to experience that type of manageability, eventually my mind's going to seek out the ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks. That manageability we've had since we were, a kid. The only cure we knew was alcohol. Unmanageability is only overcome by doing 49, living and 49, 10, and 10, and talking to God and celebrating this life in 11 and being altruistic in 12. Helping others. I heard people say step 1 is the only non-spiritual step. Bullshit. It might be the most spiritual step because you're admitting powerlessness, and powerlessness pushes you to seek power. People say I'm going to do the spiritual part of the program. It's all. So let's go to XXV, Doctor's opinion. Very beginning of Doctor's opinion. One thing I want to read first before we start is many people call it, I used to call it a disease concept. And it for many reasons, Joe McQueen from Joe and Charlie used to say disease with a hyphen in between dis and ease, away from ease, right? But I call it an illness because what Bill Wilson explained in 1960, and I'm going to read what he said. He says, this is from my letter to the Grapevine, I believe. He says, we AAers have never called alcoholism a disease because technically speaking, it's not a disease. For example, there's no such thing as heart disease. Instead, there are many separate ailments or combinations of them. It is something like that with alcoholism. Therefore, we do not wish to get into the wrong with the medical profession by pronouncing alcoholism a disease entirely. Hence, we've always called it an illness or a malady, a far safer term. So here we go, Doctor's opinion. We have Alcoholics Anonymous, talking about the first 100, believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of plan of recovery described in this book. Look at that, the medical estimate. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have experienced the suffering of our members and have witnessed our return to health. Oh, should shut this down. Sorry. Return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician of a nationally prominent hospital, Charles B. Towns Hospital, specializing in treatment of alcohol and drug addiction. Oh, there's drug addiction mentioned in the big book. Be careful. Don't mention that at meetings. So, this is, this is for everyone. Just like that's what Big Book of Pain is about right there. Gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. The doctor, this doctor's opinion is universal. I didn't understand that when I got here because I was always told you go to A for alcohol, you go to NA for addiction, all this crap. And first person I ever took to rehab after hearing about 5 pistols on the outside was a heroin addict. My sponsor said, read in the book. And he's like, that's me, and doctor's opinion. Boom. So, still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. So to whom it may concern, I put my name, I always have my name written there in the book. I have specialized in treatment of alcoholism for many years. That's 38 years at the time. This is around 37. He wrote this when the big book was really in the heat of writing it. In late 1934, I attended a patient, that's Bill, who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of the type I can regard as hopeless. Hopeless means you're impossible, something impossible to solve. Remember I talked about the pine box, a hopeless condition of mind and body. In the course of his third treatment, actually, if you read some of his other books, I think he went there 4 times, but I'm not going to argue with it. In the course of his third treatment, like some of us have been in rehab multiple times, he acquired certain ideas, in this case, spiritual ones, concerning a possible means of recovery. Wow, for him to see that. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his concession to other alcoholics, impressing upon them they must, I would underline that, must, do likewise with still others. This book has 103 musts in it, I believe. What is a must? It's a essential requirement, something that is so important it can't be missed or ignored or neglected. It's an absolute necessity. So underline those musts when you come across them. So it's a requirement. We must work with others. And anyone that has relapsed and says, "Oh, I do the steps," and so they don't work, well, did you sponsor? Nope. Or did you do your 10 step? Nope. I always came across that. I've never known anyone that's done the steps and used. And I always come across some holes. Oh, I don't sponsor. I can't. Or I can't make my amends. I did a few of them. That's what it says here. This has become the basis of rapid and growing fellowship of these men and women and their families. And this is a doctor saying this. Take in mind, this man and over 100 others have appeared to recovered. The basis, so, of their fellowship was working with others, passing on the exact same spiritual ideas to another, to another, to another. Bill Wilson called it chain style. That was the basis of their fellowship at that time. That's another word for basis. Would be foundation. Is that the foundation of AA today? Working with other people. You know, is it meetings? It's not about how many fist steps people hear. You know, and that's not a success. It's how much time you have. How about how much time you put into it? Right? What's the basis of your recovery? Is a better question. How many of you led to a spiritual awakening? How many of you helped getting well? You know, there's a bold statement. That's a bold statement by a doctor who has worked with 40,000 alcoholics at 2% recovery rate. He said over 100 of them have recovered. You know, this guy saw in 30 years, he only saw 800 people recover out of 40,000. That's 2%. 800 out of 40,000. And he didn't know those 800 were alcoholics. And now he's seen 100. You think he's a little bit like blown away or waiting for it to happen? So he says, I personally know scores is 20 of cases where the type of with other methods had failed completely. He's never seen anything like this. These facts appear to extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in the group. They may mark a new epoch, means new era, in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such cases. So he knew that they're onto something. And he knew this could change the world, help millions. And look what he says about an alcoholic. You may absolutely rely on anything they say about themselves. When's an alcoholic lying? When their mouth's moving, right? That's the old joke. You may absolutely rely. Now, thinking about this for a second, there was no such thing as recovery. There was, a good recovery for alcoholic was you did your detox and maybe got 6 days and drank a couple days and detoxed again or cleaned up again for a few days. And he's saying you may rely on anything what these drunks say about themselves with the press push and all that. But look at the endorsement there. Everything they say about themselves. This comes from a doctor. Yet people in the fellowships, when I speak of the book, they say, take what you want, leave the rest. What? Ugh. It is very truly yours, William D. Silkworth, MD. All right. The physician who at our request gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarges upon his views in their statement that follows. In his statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture. I'm sorry. No, that's my place. Confirms alcoholic torture must believe that the body of the alcoholic is quite as unnormal as the mind. Alcoholic, is insane. They were in insane asylums, like we talked about. They were mentally insane because they looked at alcohol as a mental problem only. What Silkworth discovered is the body. Brand new radical concept. It did not satisfy us to be told we cannot control our drinking just because we're maladjusted to life, that we're full fright from reality, and outright mental defectives. Right there is the old diagnosis. That's the pre-AA diagnosis of alcoholics, that they are maladjusted to life, full fright from reality, outright mental defectives. And he's saying it did not satisfy us to be told that we cannot control our drinking. So all these alcoholics are never satisfied with that diagnosis. That's the old diagnosis of alcoholics. They were insane, maladjusted to life, full from reality, and mental defects. He's crazy. Put him in a room, lock the door, and throw away the key. That's why they got lost in the system. Says back to the book, these things were true to some extent. In fact, to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. The reason why hospitals like towns popped up treating alcohol and drug addiction is they didn't look at alcoholics anymore as mental patients, but there was still lots of alcoholics, being put in institutions, even to this day, doped up. Look at all the alcoholics, look at all the addicts in prison. Look at all the addicts in prison, and alcoholics too. Some guy got freed in California recently because he was falsely accused of a DUI. How do you get falsely accused of a DUI and he was looking at 30 years and he got out to 12? Of a DUI where someone got killed. Back to the book. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out the physical factor is incomplete. Why is it incomplete? Because the physical factor, the craving for more, once we start, makes us an alcoholic. I mean, the obsession is, it of course brings us back to it. But the real thing is, how many people have obsessions with drugs or alcohol, but don't have the allergy? They might pick up the drink, but they're not going to that. Oh, I better stop. The doctor discovered the missing link for who this book is written for, the real alcoholic. The doctor's theory we have an allergy interests us. As laymen, our opinions as to its sound may of course mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things which otherwise we cannot account. Alcoholics, related with this concept because it was that's why they called it a phenomenon. Why did I can't stop drinking? They couldn't put it into words, and he put it into words for them. Here's what you got, and they're like, yeah. You know what it was like. I mean, I remember I sat through 8 meetings. I never heard the allergy obsession thing for a while. And when someone explained it to me, I was like, yeah. So as though we work our solution as spiritual as well as the altruistic, as the unselfish plane, we favor hospitalization of the alcoholic is very jittery, befogged. That's very important. Because some guy calls you up and he goes, hey, he's drunk, says, can you work with me? And well, I recommend detox. There's nothing I can tell you right now anyways. They don't want detox, then nothing you can do. More often than not, it's important here's why, the man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he then has a better chance of understanding, accepting what we have to offer. The doctor writes, the subject presented in this book seems to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholism. Paramount is the highest peak of a mountain range, highest peak, highest peak. I can remember the Paramount, studios picture. I say this that there are many years of experience as a medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. There was therefore a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered such masterly detail in so many pages. There's another endorsement. We doctors have realized for a long time that some moral psychology, that's what Benjamin Rush said, moral psychology is the study and development of moral character development. You want to develop the person's character to make them better. We doctors have realized that I just read the same part. So he says, we doctors have realized that some form of moral psychology was important to alcoholics, but its application presented difficult and was beyond our conception, meaning he didn't know how to do it. Neither did Rush. That's why there's no recovery plan with those guys. Now look what he says here. With our ultra modern standards, remember what was happening in the 30s. You had the ICU was coming into play. You had the polio vaccines were not far off. So there was x-rays and all sorts of things were happening. With our ultra modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. I'm going to reread that paragraph in layman's language, what he's saying here. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of spiritual experience was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. With our ultra-modern standard, our scientific approach to everything, we doctors perhaps are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of God that lie outside our human knowledge. That's what he's saying. That's what he's saying. Back to the book, because many years ago, one of the leading contributors of this book came under the care in this hospital, and while he acquired some ideas which he put in practical application in a week, no, at once. I explained to those I work with as soon as you get around step 9, you start to give it away. Maybe even before then, from the practical application at once, right away. Later, he required the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients with some misgivings. We consented. So he probably thought about it and said, I don't got nothing to lose. So he was kind of, should we, this guy who just, had a spiritual experience in my hospital, now wants to wander around. He's in charge. So, he saw something special happening. The case we have followed have been most interesting. In fact, and here's a non-medical word, many of them are amazing. Amazing is not a medical term. You don't have a doctor, oh, that's amazing. It doesn't, you don't hear it that often. It's another endorsement. The unsubstance of these men, as we come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, their community spirit is indeed inspiring when one who's labored long and hard in the weary in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves and still more power that pulls chronic alcoholics from the gates of death. So another endorsement right there. He knew them. He knew these guys. These guys have been in this hospital. Later on Doc's opinion, he talks about this one guy was a drunk and he came back unrecognizable as Hank Parker's. Now they're recovered. And he felt he was a failure as a doctor for not treating alcoholics. When he was fit, thought he was a failure. Alcoholics, came back from death. He must have been a little blown away again. See what it says here. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for alcohol, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be taken to maximum benefit. We're going to stop right there. It means detox, right? Detox is a lot safer nowadays, and even easier nowadays than it was 23 years ago for me. Nowadays, they just give something that knocks them out for 3 days, Next week, we're going to pick off just where we left off. And we're going to get into, we read about the old diagnosis, right, of alcoholics, the outright mental defects and all that. Now we're going to read the new diagnosis. We'll read the paragraph we believe in, so suggested next week. And that's one of my favorite in the book. I'm going to stop right there.